Good day. In this, I'm going to talk about how to pass recruiter screening rounds. And right from the start, the people that I had the most success with almost never made it a crucial priority to interview prep or to make an exceptional performance during their screening rounds. Okay. Instead, what these people do is to be genuinely interested to understand if they might be a good fit for the role, and importantly, if they have a chance to pass their final interview rounds. Okay, so it's a more consultative type of approach, and I would highly recommend that you do the same. Right now, on the topic of why do people fail screening rounds, probably the most common reason why people fail screening rounds is that you don't match the profile, you don't match the minimum requirements for the profile of the candidate that they're looking for. And here, you might think that, hey, but I have the job description, which says what they're looking for. They already had my CV, so how can this happen? Well, you must understand that the job description that you're reading is probably a marketing manifesto that they were using for the past 3 to 5 years for any of the role that they were looking the ideal candidates for, right? So you must also understand that if they would tell you in advance what they're looking for in the ideal candidate, everyone would prepare just that and nothing else. So they would exploit these things. So they will not tell you this. Okay, how can you find out what they're looking for? Well, by using your listening skills. Oftentimes, the types of questions they ask will reveal some of these secrets, right? Now, on the topic of the CVs, okay, so if your CV sounds so good, it doesn't mean you are who you say you are, okay? Because what happens is there are, services, and there are people who can sell themselves super well in their CVs with the right types of keywords, but which in reality, within the first few minutes of interviewing them, they would realize that that's not what they're looking for. Okay. Now, the second thing I'd like to talk about here would be the stories. Which stories should you use while interviewing with the recruiter? Okay. So your stories could be great ones, but they might have happened 20 years ago. And, if they happened 20 years ago, what happens is they're not as relevant for the type of performance they expect from you now, because the definition of behavioral interview is that they look at your past experiences as a predictor of success in your future job. Whereas if your past experiences were a long time ago, they will be less of a predictor of your performance, right? Or the other way around. Some people have newer experiences, but they might be a bit weak. Okay, so one approach you could blend the two would be to simply mention them both. Mention a newer story and an older one, especially if communication is a strength you have, because this way, you have more chances to convince them, to earn their trust that you're worthwhile moving on in the process. Now, also with respect to your stories, sometimes the way the stories you choose might not represent the seniority that you have. Okay, so my advice would be to never never impact the seniority that you want to communicate in your stories, because that can trigger also all sorts of problematic scenarios, such as you might impress the recruiter, and this happened to me twice last year. Candidates who impressed the recruiter to such an extent that the recruiter recommended they would apply for more senior roles. Okay, and both candidates accepted, and both candidates failed subsequently their final interview rounds, because then the expectations of them being so senior never turned out to be true, because the seniority of the role gets tested by subject matter experts usually. So you may bluff it with a recruiter, but then it will not turn to your favor as well. So seniority could be also a root cause that you might want to pay particular attention to in your stories, right? The third thing would be communication. The way you communicate can easily make or break a recruiter interview round. Okay, the most basic scenario is when candidates are unintelligible even without them realizing. Okay, it happens. You'll be surprised how often this happens, and for how senior types of roles. So if you want to see if you have this problem, if you suspect you might have this problem, you can also role play with someone who has a different area of expertise than yours, and to ask them whether you are intelligible enough, right? The other huge problem in communication that more than a few candidates have these days would be AI rewarded answers. Okay, so for someone like me who's doing role plays quite often, I've done one the other day, and it took me 15 seconds to determine that the candidate used AI rewarded answers. And furthermore, when you use AI rewarded answers, you'll have to read them from somewhere, and the written answer will sound as such in a job interview, and that will never ever play to your advantage in a job interview, especially with a recruiter where impression-based hiring is a huge thing. Recruiters have this strength of reading people extremely well. Okay, so AI rewarded answers, reading answers from your computer screens will greatly damage your chances to pass screening rounds. Also with final entry rounds, but this is what we're talking about right now, right? The other thing I want to talk about here, I think it was point number 4. Yeah, it was if you have a suspicious CV. Okay, what do I mean by a suspicious CV? Many different scenarios, but the most common of them would be if you have employment gaps as of recently, you've done nothing for the past 3 years. You have to be prepared, to sell yourself on something there, because that's highly suspicious. You've done nothing for 3 years, and then you want to get a senior role into a FANG company, right? So I don't know, maybe you had a startup, but you must do something there to clarify and expect to get questioned on those things. Okay, and finally, the fifth major reason why people fail screening rounds is because they made a bad impression. Okay, so I'm not talking about AI rewarded answer. That's also a bad impression, super bad impression. But speaking about people who show up late to their interviews, and I was surprised myself, that some candidates show up late to coaching sessions as well. Like it's not as if it's a one time. No, they always show up late. So there's people like this, or interrupting your interviewer during the conversation might also come across the wrong way, even though you are a super well-intentioned person, right? So again, recruiters and HR professionals in general do one thing extremely well, and that is to read people. Okay, they're really good at it. And if you're thinking that you can make things up in a job interview, in my experience, that's far less likely to happen. I'd advise you to rather be vague in what you're saying than to lie in the job interviews, because it doesn't really work, right? I just wanted to close here with some things that I found that do not matter as much as people think, especially for screening rounds. So especially for screening rounds, I often hear from candidates that they wished they remembered more details to share with their interviewers. So whenever they would challenge you on something, you say, "Hey, but I do not remember about these specific details." However, this candidate still passed those screening rounds. Okay, so preparing, a full story bank for the purpose of job interviews shouldn't be a main goal. I briefly touched upon this in the intro of this video. Okay, the second thing that I found that is less relevant than most people realized is to be familiar, or to become very familiar with the company's core values or Amazon's leadership principles. It doesn't really connect well with interview success unless you use that as a framework to improve your communication and your interviewing skills for yourself, right? The third thing is delivery doesn't have to be crystal clear. Okay, so yes, you must be intelligible, otherwise they will lose hope in you as a candidate. They won't take a risk with you. But from here, to delivering exceptional performance, to put together a great show for the purpose of screening round, again, it's not something that I found crucially important, because I see, one of the core reasons why people hire me and use my services is because they think like, hey, I didn't perform to my best during the screening rounds, and I'm expecting I will for the final interview rounds. Another thing that doesn't matter as much as some candidates think would be your CV. Okay, so long your CV is who you really are. It doesn't have to be really polished or made by a professional, those CVs are the most efficient to pass applicant tracking systems, so if you have the right keywords, then yes, they're more efficient, but even so, I've had very limited success in that approach. But so long your CV makes sense and, it doesn't have obvious grammatical mistakes every other sentence, it's perfectly fine, so yeah. And the other thing that doesn't matter as much as you might expect in these interviews, even if the interview is a video screening call, it's the quality of your video, or to have super high quality sound, or to have to interview from a great location. Like, it's perfectly normal. I hear people interviewing from their car all the time, and this is not a predictor of success. So overthinking these cosmetics, so to speak, is not what yields the best results in this job, in passing the screening rounds. But again, as I said in the beginning of this video, you should be genuinely interested in understanding, if you might be a good fit, and if you have a chance to pass the final interview round, because ultimately that's what matters. And I found this approach, this strategy, to also have candidates more relaxed during these screening rounds. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.